Have you ever found yourself maybe avoiding something that was, well, difficult, that you didn't really want to do, but you knew that you'd have to do eventually? Now, maybe you put off a trip to the doctor because you fear what those symptoms might be indicating. Maybe you've come to a point in life at some time where you have to make a decision as a caregiver for someone that you love, a decision that might be unbearably difficult. Or it could be just as simple as putting off a household chore that you really dislike. Or even walking into a classroom maybe to take a test that you're afraid that you're not going to pass. Some things in life are just hard, aren't they? And we know that for Jesus in his life and ministry, there were also some difficult moments. Let's take a look at this passage from Matthew at one of them, from Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. The Gospel of Matthew, in our lectionary reading for this first Sunday in Lent, this is where we encounter Jesus who has come upon a very hard thing. Matthew tells us that after 40 days of fasting that Jesus is famished. Have you ever fasted for 40 days? Oh, maybe 14 days. Maybe 4 days? I'll bet he was famished. In this weakened state, unaccompanied, he might have felt faint. Maybe he was a little dizzy even. And maybe he was just at his rope's end. He was alone, weakened, perhaps with a fuzzy remembrance of his baptism just before this wilderness wandering. Jesus appears to be at a pretty low point. This is when the temptation comes on full force. Isn't that just like it works with us? It's a very human situation. Now, we do say we really want Jesus to be human, but not so human that we can't grasp his divinity too. And yet there he is being poked and prodded at his lowest, most human point. Perhaps we are there too, or maybe we have been, or we will be, at the lowest point, putting off a decision, an action, or a response to being battered by life. On Ash Wednesday of this week, we acknowledged our weakness, our humanness, our falling headlong into sin, our brokenness. Our bodies, no matter how we might prop them up with medicine and exercise and other means we vainly employ to maybe cover up the signs of aging, our bodies will eventually fail us. What does this mean, especially now during this Lenten season? Who is this Jesus who is so like us, so human, and so tempted at his very lowest point. What does our following this human, divine one require of us? You know, when we look back to the very beginning of our Old Testament, when Satan came to Adam and Eve in the garden, the question posed was, can you be like God? Now, coming to this worn down, isolated Jesus, the tempter poses another question. Can you be fully human and give up power and take care of your human needs? How do we see this second question? Is the devil trying to force Jesus into doing something wrong? Or is he trying to use reason to move him to do something that might make sense, but, well, it is done for all the wrong reasons? This test, this temptation has to do with intentions. Can Jesus embrace both his humanity and his divinity? Now, hunger, that's the first thing. It's an easy target. The reasoning is applied. Why should the Son of God go hungry? This is the same reasoning that the prodigal son used. If you remember, when he realized the abundance that his father had at home while he was far away and living literally on pig slop. Well, it seems pretty rational to eat if you're able to when you're hungry. But if Jesus falls prey to this reasoning, he really steps out of being fully human, of being God incarnate in the flesh. People, regular people, after all, can't turn stones into bread, no matter how hard we try. Maybe you've decided to give something up for Lent this year. The common choices are things that we eat and drink: chocolate, wine, soda, or maybe it's some sort of digital nourishment or enrichment or something we like TV or social media. In Lenten fast, no matter what kind it is, you are invited to abide with your hunger and learn from the experience. Now, when you're hungry for chocolate, but you don't give in to that temptation, perhaps you can uncover the reason for that hunger, the hunger beneath the hunger. Part of fasting is surviving without, living with the hunger, but setting it aside. It can set up an examination of a paradox. Can we be hungry and still be living and still be okay? Can we want something we can't have and still be relatively happy? Can we live into abundance without stripping that abundance from someone else? Maybe what we long for is more than chocolate or time on Facebook. What about our deep hungers, our deepest ones, to belong, to have a family, to be secure in our jobs, our homes? Where do we find God in all of these hungers, this longing? Being hungry for something, anything, that's not a goal to achieve. Being hungry schools us. Allowing yourself to live with an unsatisfied hunger, at least for a time, is an opportunity to learn something about yourself and to learn something about God. Fasting as a spiritual discipline invites us to recognize that we can both hold hope and pain. We can hold them both in the same hand. We can feel love and a gnawing want all at the same time. We can trust God to answer our prayers, even if the answers turn out differently than we had expected or hoped. When we get to the second temptation of Jesus, it sounds also very human, something that we all long for: safety, security. I don't think that I'm unusual in that many of my prayers have to do with safety, safe travel for myself, for others, emotional security for my loved ones, protection for people I know and love, and myself from disease or accidents. One of our deepest human fears is the fear of death, of being forgotten as soon as we take our last breath. And these fears, make no mistake, they drive our behavior, sometimes beyond rational understanding. But if we look to the lesson of the cross, that includes understanding that even as God's beloved, even as God's children, we still experience pain and loss and even death. God's love doesn't insulate us from the vagaries of life. God's love does continue, even in our vulnerabilities. Jesus understood this and bore witness to the ability to be deeply loved, even in suffering. Now, that final temptation of Jesus moved beyond physical hunger or a longing for safety and went straight toward the human longing to be important, to have authority. All this will be yours, said the devil as he waved his hand toward the crowns that so many of us struggle to attain. Fame, or just recognition, being seen, having power. It's this final temptation that reveals most clearly how Jesus upended the values of this world. Jesus showed how humility and surrender make more of an impact than visibility, power, and fame. The story of the Christian church throughout the ages, well, we can see the struggles, particularly with this temptation. Story after story reveals how Christian leaders have grasped for power and used their influence and corrupted the story, that story of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. You know, as a leader in the church today, that is still a very delicate balance, to lead with humility, but to step out of the spotlight, but still to make enough noise to draw attention to God, but not to ourselves. To live into the ideal of Christian power is to live into, well, our own vulnerabilities, our own weaknesses. Remember, Jesus was lifted up, but he was lifted up to a cross, not to a gilded throne. That might serve as a good reminder for those of us who would follow him. So today, at the beginning of Lent, what will we do with our hungers, our drive for both security and power? Well, following Jesus into the wilderness means seeing the choices that he made. Hunger instead of being filled, weakness without rescue, humility that stays out of the spotlight. Instead of honor, glory, power, and authority, Jesus chose uncertainty, a quiet abiding, and willingness to fulfill his calling no matter what the cost. And that cost of discipleship, it is indeed very high. Now, we might prefer the flashy miracles and God-sent rescue and the head-swelling claim of being right. God's plans often work in the opposite direction. While we may pray to God to deliver us, to prove God's love for us, we may find that it's best to just set these temptations aside. While we may not choose to enter the wilderness as Jesus did, we may not choose pain and loss and danger and grief. We may well find ourselves in one of those wildernesses. God does not cause these wilderness times in our lives. God does not want us to suffer to teach us a lesson, but suffering happens. And sometimes even in hindsight, it is at these times that we can see God most clearly. Perhaps long walks in the wilderness teach us what it means to be loved by God, even more than those blessings that we enjoy. We can be loved by God and still live in uncertainty. We can be loved by God and we may still be hungry. We can long for recognition and still feel the glow of the quiet presence of the Holy Spirit sitting beside us. It may take us some time to learn to trust God through all of this. Perhaps this Lenten season is the right time for you and I, for us to quit running and to look evil in the face and hear the tempter's voice and recognize the appeal of all that the world says is important. And then perhaps we can truly decide who we are and whose we are. Lent provides a time for us to embrace all that it means to be made in God's image and to be wholly human and vulnerable and loved. I pray that your Lenten season will lead you to find God through whatever temptations come your way, and that we together may come away from this holy season to open wide the joy of the resurrection on the other side. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.